So I appreciate you taking that time, and I hope that the knowledge you learned tonight, you can pass on to someone else as well. We do plan on recording it as well. Do you need to get on Zoom?
It's all going.
It's already all going.
Yeah,
Hello,
'cause
everyone. Okay.
I can edit it down after it's recorded.
Perfect. Okay. My name is Denise Romney, and I am the Director of Communications for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in this region. And so it's just our honor to have you here. This is just a community event that we want to do. Dr. Smith, he is a member of our church congregation, and it's just an honor that he was willing to come and do this for us, you know, at no cost. He's just doing this out of kindness of his heart. And he's going to share his story tonight, I'm sure, as well, that you'll understand why this is so near and dear to him as well. So, Dr. Smith, Dr. Josh, nobody calls you Dr. Smith.
Nobody calls me Dr. Smith.
I'm like, it's so awkward.
Yeah.
Dr. Josh, you're trying
Dr.
to
Josh
you.
is how I prefer. Thank
I
you,
know.
Denise. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you tonight, and I really appreciate you all taking time out of your busy schedules to talk about this important issue. And I know many of you all are here for personal reasons. There's an experience or someone that you love that either is or has had a problem in this area. And we are going to be talking about difficult things. If you need to take a break at any point, this is a no judgment area. Feel free to step out because talking about these issues is hard. And I really appreciate your all's willingness to do so, to talk about this. September is Suicide Awareness Month, and that's the reason why we wanted to present this training. This is training to help individuals who are not mental health professionals be able to talk to someone who is experiencing suicidal thinking. Talking to someone who is feeling suicidal is difficult. You know, it's part of my job. I received a lot of education about it, but when it gets brought up, I get a little nervous, and I have a lot of training about it. When it gets brought up and you're not a mental health professional, that's a whole nother thing. And especially when it's somebody that you care about who is bringing it up, because the last thing we want is the people that we love to experience pain, and we don't want them to be hurt in any way or do anything that would hurt themselves. A suicide is an issue that is well discussed in my family. I have 3 younger brothers, but 2 of them have died to suicide. My brother Jared died in 2002 when he was 19 years old, right before he was scheduled to serve a Mormon mission in Arizona. And he was going to be gone for 2 years. And I will tell you, this is Jared right here, this big guy. To this day, it is the most well-planned suicide I've ever heard of in my life, because he was leaving for 2 years. So he got to say goodbye to everybody. And he cried a little bit and like, oh yeah, he's going for 2 years. And they thought he was saying goodbye for 2 years, but he was saying goodbye. And then 5 years ago, my brother Jacob, who's right here, passed away to suicide. And that was a spontaneous suicide attempt. And also, about 11 years ago, I attempted suicide by jumping off the 2nd Street Bridge. I don't recommend that. It stinks. Yeah. And was a miracle in every sense of the word, because I jumped off the bridge on October 30th, 2010, and it was a warm day. And we don't have many warm days. It was 80 degrees that day. So, you know, it would be very easy to have died of hypothermia. There was one boat out. Usually all the boating is done. And I broke 8 ribs on this side. And I remember coming up out of the water, and and not expecting to be alive. And that's a weird sensation. And the boat that was out there came up and they threw me a life preserver, and I was in there, and the ladies on the boat were like, pull him in, pull him in. And the guys on the boat were like, don't pull him in, he's crazy, he just jumped off the bridge. And the guys yell, why did you jump off the bridge? And I yell back, because I'm so happy with my life.
Oh, jeez.
And that was the first point where I knew I could be okay. Because I did that and I was still me. Because that's something that I would say in that circumstance. And, you know, part of that suicide attempt was because I was having problems in graduate school and concern about not being able to graduate, and extreme problems with my dissertation. And I will tell you, after getting treatment and on the right medicine, 2 years after my suicide attempt, I had a doctorate degree in my own practice. And I tell you this story because just because someone makes a suicide attempt, it does not mean that their life is over and they will never be able to do anything productive for the rest of their life. Things can get better and get better in a hurry. And that's one of the things that I hope we all remember through this time. Okay, now, one of the things that is important to keep in mind at all times, yeah, could you pass these out, please? I forgot all about that. It's important that we remember our attitudes and opinions when it comes to suicide and mental health in general. And it is amazing sometimes some of the things that I have heard people say about suicide. I'll never forget, at my brother Jacob's funeral, somebody said to me with a straight face, somebody who claims to like me and my family, said, you know, Josh, this is hard to believe that your parents have lost 2 children to suicide. I thought they were good parents. And that's a miracle I didn't slug them.
Yes.
And we all have, going into it, certain values about life and maybe religious values, but judging people for a mental illness is not helpful. And I also had somebody come up to, well, I'll tell this, I like this story because it makes the point a little better, I think. One person that I met when I was in the country of Chile, her son committed suicide at the age of 20. And at his funeral, the pastor said, this is a tragedy for the family and that they will miss their son and their brother. And the real tragedy is that he will be burning in hell through eternity. And while having a loved one commit suicide does produce very complex emotions, we need to make sure that we do not judge people or their families. And, you know, you can always find a friendly neighborhood psychologist to talk about those complex feelings. So this is a picture of the bridge that I jumped off of. And it's a powerful reminder to me about how things can get better. Okay. Someone dies by suicide approximately every 13 minutes. Someone aged 10 to 24 dies by suicide approximately 1 hour and 35 minutes. You know, when I first started babysitting at 12, my mother insisted that I go to a CPR class at the Red Cross, which was a good idea. And I've used that CPR 3 times. 2 of it was at the prison, but I still used it. And I'm glad I know how to do it. because you never know. This training is called QPR because it is very likely that you will talk to an individual who is having suicidal thinking. If you haven't already, it will happen again. The majority of times, the first person that a suicidal individual will tell that they're having suicidal thinking is a family member or a friend. It is not a mental health professional. I had my first suicidal thought at 15. And I didn't tell anybody until after my suicide attempt. So that was 17 years of not telling anyone. While it is scary for somebody to tell you that they are having suicidal thoughts, I want you all to know that it is the best compliment that you will ever receive in your life, because they have thought about who they would tell for years. They pondered it. They really thought, who can I trust with this information, who's going to listen to me and not freak out and be there for me? And they chose you. And it's a very powerful thing. As a father of children, one of the things that scares me to death is that the second leading cause of death for children between the ages of 10 to 16 is suicide. Number one is accidents. I've seen my children in action. That checks out. But suicide, of all the things that we worry about when it comes to our children, double checking everything, it's suicide. And so just like I needed to learn CPR to babysit children, I think parents need to learn QPR, because we want our children to be comfortable telling somebody when they are feeling suicidal. If a child is feeling suicidal and they tell anyone, even my nonverbal daughter, if they tell her, they are 68% less likely to commit suicide. If they tell a parent, they're 98% less likely to commit suicide. So, one of the things, I have a long list of pet peeves. I never like it when people say I'm going to give 110%. That's impossible. Yes. But I hate it when people say, hey, Dr. Josh, can you do a presentation on suicide with the adults in our congregation? And I'm like, what about the teenagers? Oh, we don't want them getting any ideas. They've heard it. Yes. They've seen it. They have friends who engage in self-injury. They've had friends talk about it. They need to hear it from a correct source. And also, it models to them, like if they are in the room with you, then they know that you're okay talking about it. And I don't care if your child has never expressed any mental health symptoms of any kind. Having, as part of like a conversation one-on-one, every now and then, repeating, now, if you ever feel sad, if you ever feel like you want to hurt yourself, I want you to know that I'm here and I'm ready to listen. Because that is necessary. So sometimes people say that if somebody wants to commit suicide, they won't talk about it. But sometimes they do talk about it. Well, this is one of the big things that people misunderstand about suicide all the time. It really comes in waves. Sometimes it's just a small little wave, the one that, caresses your toes as you're walking on the beach. And it's just like, I'm just kind of tired. I'm in pain a lot. And then sometimes it's a big wave it's a monsoon wave and everything feels horrible. Just because I experienced suicidal thoughts every day of my life for 17 years. But I didn't want to kill myself every day. Sometimes it was small waves, sometimes it was medium, and sometimes it was big. There was a lot of ambiguity in it. And many times people are just trying to figure out the best way to manage it. Now, this is an important topic to talk about, and it requires maturity as we think about it. When we look at completed suicides, 50% come through firearms because they work. You know, it doesn't take much effort. It can go from a bad thought to completion very quickly. It took a lot to get up that bridge. You know, I was thinking about it and walking it, you know, and then it didn't even work. But a firearm works. And I've had to have very mature discussions with parents before. I'll never forget this one. And whenever I think about this story, it makes me cry. Because I had a single father whose wife had passed away, and he was raising his son by himself, and his son had depression. And this man was the ultimate hunter. He had the big safe that hold 50 guns, and it was full. And his son was very suicidal, and he had to go to Wellstone. And I'm going to have a session with the father before his son gets discharged, and I'm prepping myself before, you know, okay, you can do this, Josh. Don't offend him, but talk about gun safety.
Yes.
And, you know, I was really, you know, getting myself so prepared for this. And I start talking, and I don't make it a minute. And he's like, don't worry about this, Dr. Josh. I've already thought about this. I have taken all my guns and the safe to my father's house. They're going to stay there until my son gets better. And I really admire that. Because one of the things that I know is that we will do things for our children that we wouldn't even do for ourselves. And that father knew that's what he had to do for his son. The technology for gun safety is amazing. And there are some really creative things that they have out there. Trigger locks are very helpful. And, you know, there's a way that an individual can have their firearms and still keep them safe if you have a mentally ill family member. Okay, so men complete suicide at a rate of 4 times than that of females, but females attempt suicide more often. That's because males choose more violent methods. That's why theirs complete more often. And over 1 million people attempt suicide each year. For every documented death by suicide, there are 25 suicide attempts. And one of the things that we can never know is somebody's individual experience with suicide. There is an event that my family and I participate in every year, and I love it. And it is the Out of the Darkness Walk. It occurs at the Louisville waterfront. And you walk along the path, and they have on those concrete steps up by the waterfront, they have shoes to represent each person who committed suicide in Kentucky that year, and military boots for each veteran who committed suicide that year from Kentucky. And there are thousands of people there. Last year and this year, they've had to stage it out over time. So like families go out like every 15-minute burst with COVID. but it is a COVID safe activity. And in previous years where we could talk to other people, seeing all these people and their own individual experiences. And I will tell you, it is hard not to talk to a person whose life has been affected by suicide in some way. There's another story that I love. I went out to Utah. I was invited by my friend who's a therapist to do some suicide presentations at high schools in Utah. And I get in, and I don't know what the circumstances are, but there was a lot of people traveling at this time. It was 2019. That was one thing. And I had a reservation, and it was like the Seinfeld bit. I go to the rental car desk, and I'm like, I have my reservation. They're like, well, we don't have a car for you. I'm like, well, I don't think you understand reservation. and then they and she said, maybe if you wait here at the airport for 5 hours, I can come up with something. I was like, I don't know. I'm on a pretty tight schedule here. And she's like, well, why are you here? And I said, well, I'm doing these presentations on suicide for high school students. And she stops for a minute. And then she gets on her keyboard and she's like, how do you feel about driving a 15-passenger van?
You're like Brian.
And I was like, I'm ready. I can do it. and she rings it all up and she hands me the keys and she said, my best friend died of suicide when I was a junior in high school. I don't want that to happen for anybody else. And you know, these are powerful experiences that people have gone through. So when we are looking at the risk factors of who might experience suicide more often, do they have a family history of suicide? Has there been child cruelty, child abuse, previous suicide attempts? History of mental disorders, substance abuse, feelings of hopelessness, cultural and religious beliefs, social isolation, and poor impulse control. The substance abuse can be a big problem. My brother was drunk when he completed his suicide attempt. My brother Jacob. That's why it was spontaneous, because he was not fully contemplating what he was doing at that time. So when we have a mentally ill person who is under the influence of a substance, we take that very seriously. Okay, these are some of the high-risk populations. Native Americans, veterans is very high. One of the reasons is I've never met a veteran who didn't have a firearm. I did a practicum at the VA, and it was such an interesting place. But like one of the policies there was when people sat down for their therapy session, they had to put their firearm on your desk. And it was just people would walk in and here you go, Dr. John. Okay. And everyone did it. LGBTQ, especially with coming out. And so we have to be very sensitive during that time as they are sharing that information with others. And youth and juvenile justice. Okay, the 49.9, suffocation, that's usually choking, hanging. Poisoning, 14.9, and I gotta tell you, this is also added on the 110% list. The websites and apps that tell you how to complete suicide. Exactly how many pills to take.
There's such thing.
Oh yeah. And it's not even on the dark web, it's on the regular web. And it's very concerning. I remember one time when my children were young and I wasn't sleeping at all. I was having a fever and I go and there's no Tylenol, no ibuprofen. So I go up to Walgreens in the middle of the night, and we always get the big, because we got a lot of sick people around there, with all those kids. And so I get the big Tylenol, the big ibuprofen, and a Diet Coke. And the cashier's like, are you okay? Yeah, I got a little sick. And then in the bag, he puts the suicide crisis number in there.
Wow.
That's just thinking. And then all other means are less than 3%. So, I'm an outlier. So it is unlikely that you are going to see a clear-cut sign that somebody is going to say that you're going to think, I wonder if they're suicidal. It's not going to be obvious. And just paying attention to those things that you see, and knowing the people that you love and what they are doing is important. And I will also tell you this. One of the things that I heard the most times in the hospital was like, Josh, I didn't even know you were depressed. Because as one thing we all know, depressed people don't fake that they have depression. They fake that they're fine. And so I put on a show for 17 years. I had suicidal thoughts on the day I got married. On each day that my kids were born, I had suicidal thoughts. I was in another country when I was in Chile, and I'm doing what I wanted to do. Had suicidal thoughts every day, and it was always bridges. And I lived in this one town, which has my favorite town name in any country, Kuji Puji. And Kuji Puji, if you didn't know, is known for having the highest freestanding bridge in North America. And, as a man at 20 years old, did I test with urination to see how long it took for the urine to fall down to hit the bottom? Of course I did. And I'll tell you, I was done and I still hadn't heard the splatter. It was amazing. But I will tell you, so many nights couldn't sleep, trying to keep myself from going and running to that bridge. And nobody ever knew. So QPR stands for question, prompt, and refer. So it's intended to offer hope through positive action. It's not intended to be counseling. Providing counseling to somebody who is suicidal is very difficult. And I don't want you to have to worry about doing that. One of the other questions I get asked a lot is, how do I know that this isn't attention getting, or are they really suicidal? Don't worry about it. Right. Let me worry about that. That's one of my things I have to do, because I have that fun job of somebody suicidal and I have to decide whether they go to the hospital or not. And I have to, sleep at night after making that decision. So let a mental health professional make that decision. We're going to treat every suicide attempt. Well, like, what if it's a cry for help? Then it's a cry for help. When I was a psychologist at the prison, there was this one time I was on call and the officer calls me and she's like, Dr. Josh, we got this inmate and he has a shard of glass and it's at his wrist and he wants to kill himself. And I'm like, well, put him on the phone. I'm like, well, he's not in the office right now. I'm like, where is he? I'm like, he's in his cell. Go get him. Well, after we get done talking, go get him now. Just put the phone down and go get him. Because if all you do is stay with that person, you did a good job. That's all you have to do. So, I don't care if you have something planned. You got a cell phone, just can't. Somebody, it has happened many times. Like somebody will tell me that they're suicidal during church, and I'll text Emily, busy, come by and pick me up in a couple hours, and then she'll just leave and pick me back up in a couple hours because I'm not leaving. There's nothing else to do. Everything else can be taken care of. You're staying with that person because you might not know what to say, but you're going to be there. My favorite thing that somebody told me when I was feeling depressed, and this was after my brother Jacob died, I had a friend call me up and he said, Josh, you want to watch Star Wars and say nothing? Yes, that's exactly what I want to do. I want to watch Star Wars and say nothing. Because you don't need magic words. There are no magic words. Just be there. If that's all you do, then that's what you do. I want to make sure that you do feel empowered to be able to be the gatekeepers and help them get the help that they need. Okay. Suicides definitely can be stopped. Some people think that if somebody is suicidal, that eventually they will commit suicide. That is not true. I have played with the children of people who were suicidal before. And they are doing well. And this is the big one. If someone is having suicidal thoughts, but you don't know for sure, if you ask them, are you having suicidal thoughts? It will not lead them to think, oh, you know what? That's a good idea. I never thought about that before. I was dedicated to not telling a soul. But if somebody had just flat out said, hey, Josh, I'm worried about you. You seem depressed. Are you having thoughts about hurting yourself? I would have caved. I know me. If somebody had just put it out there, I would have said yes. So there is nothing wrong with asking the question. In fact, it is encouraged. Maybe don't, put it on the Jumbotron at the Bats game. Maybe one-on-one. That's just me. But asking it is not a problem. And if they aren't, then I have never had anybody be offended that I asked. Never. And I ask it a lot, both personally and professionally. And no one has ever said, how dare you ask me that question? Yeah. It's always, Josh, thanks for checking in. I'm really glad that you asked. But I'm doing good, I promise you. And I feel better. This is something that's everybody's business. This is something that we all need to worry about. Okay. So you will hear what we call indirect verbal cues. Sometimes it's called passive suicidality. I'm tired of life. I just can't go on. My family would be better off without me. That's a scary one. For the longest time, I thought that I just wanted to end the pain. But when I started thinking that my family would be better off without me, then I thought living was selfish. I won't be around much longer. I just want out. Who cares if I'm dead anyway? Sometimes you'll hear people say, I just want to go to sleep and not wake up. That's a really common passive. Okay. These are some of the behavior clues. This is a big one. And this is one I know that we missed with my brother Jared. He was giving stuff away. And I've seen a lot of missionaries leave, but they didn't give their stuff away before they left. And that's one that we just missed. It's like, why were you giving away your baseball bat and your Star Wars cards? You love that stuff. And you're coming back, So acquiring a gun or stockpiling pills, interest or disinterest in religion, putting personal affairs in order. Definitely amongst the adults. You know, they're telling their spouse, hey, I got a safety deposit box, the life insurance and the will is all in there. You know, that's a good idea. But just let's double check why you're saying that. So we have to be aware of changes in their social environment. For me, when I had written a whole dissertation and it got thrown out and I was going to have to repeat 2 years worth of work. And that, upon everything else, that tipped me over the top. Somebody gets fired, somebody gets divorced. You're going to be worried. A death of a spouse, terminal illness, all of these things, you're going to be worried about these issues. Because, and this is interesting to note, the highest rate of suicide is amongst teenagers. Who thinks they know what the second highest is?
It's white men.
Over 65.
Wow.
Because they feel like they're not working, they have no value. Okay, asking the question. We talked a little bit about this. When I was practicing psychology, and I am a child psychologist, there are certain topics that are kind of hard to talk about, and in normal everyday conversation, you don't really talk about them. So my mentor, Dr. Dee, had this interesting practice that she would have us do 10 minutes every day. We had to look in the mirror and say, pee, poop, sex. Pee, poop, sex, pee, poop, sex, pee, poop, sex. Because as a child psychologist, you talk about pee, and you talk about poop, and you talk about sex, and it can't be awkward. You just have to say it. But one of those things that you have to be able to just say is, are you feeling like hurting yourself? Are you having suicidal thoughts? And you just got to say it. Just say it. Now, when you ask the question, most times people aren't just like, well, you know, come to mention it now, I am. Will you help me? They will deflect. One of the common ones I get, well, you know. What do I know? I don't know what I know. That's why I asked the question. But if they say something like, it's been really hard, there's going to be a follow-up question, because they didn't say yes and they didn't say no. One of the things that you will hear is, I've had thoughts, but I would never do that. And then you want to know, why wouldn't you do that? Now, the most common answers are, I could never do that to my children. And that makes sense. But I've heard some interesting ones. Who would feed my dog? And I'm going to go with that. Who would feed your dog? You don't have a hungry dog. My favorite was, well, I can't really commit suicide, Josh. Avengers Endgame hasn't come out, and I have to know how it ends. And I went with it. Of course, we got another 5 months before that movie comes out. That's 5 months of time I got. I mean, anything could happen. So, you know, talking in a private setting, allow the person to talk. Don't feel like you have to say anything. If they're talking, that's a good sign. Get whatever they're talking about. Don't interrupt them. Let them talk for however they want to talk about. They've kept this to themselves for a long time, so they got a lot of stuff to say. And just say nothing. Just listen. Nod your head and listen. All right. So now let's talk about something that is very important. There is a number that you need to have in your phones at all times. No matter what, you have plenty of memory. You have to have in your phones 1-800-273-8255. This is the National Suicide Crisis number. It has trained individuals who help with suicide 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I will tell you, one of the nice things about this is, let's say you are talking with someone who is suicidal and they don't want to call. You can call and put them on speaker. You can say, my son is telling me he's suicidal. I don't know what to say. They will help the helper. You don't have to be the patient. Or you could say, I just got done talking to my grandfather and he said this. Should I be concerned? And they will talk to you about it. But we always have our cell phones with us. That is why we are going to save this number in our phone before we leave today, or you get no cookies. So that you don't have to look it up on the internet. Just save it under suicide crisis and you have it. Now, the nice thing is, and I'm very excited this is going to be exciting. Are you all ready for this? Congress did something nice. Oh, they did. It's amazing. March of 2022, it's not going to be this long number. It is going to be 988. Is going to be a national number. I don't care if you're in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming. It will be 988. They chose, there was a well debated on what the number should be. They didn't listen to me. That's fine. But I see why they chose this number. 911 for medical emergencies, 988 for mental health emergencies. And that starts in March, and you'll see a lot of commercials about that coming up. And I am so excited for that because I can't tell you how many times people didn't have the number saved in their phones. They didn't have wireless. They couldn't find the number. And that's why we save it. But 988, I'll remember that. I won't have to look anything up. Now the other one, and the teenagers really like this. You can save this one too. This is the text number. And you can text somebody who is a therapist and you can be the patient or you can be the helper and it's a really neat thing to do. Like while you're sitting talking to somebody, like, okay, talking to this person, they're saying this, what should I say? And then they'll send you a text and say this. Have you thought about? I have called this number 2 different times when I was feeling suicidal. And both times the therapist was excellent. I mean, not as good as me, but that's a high standard. So make sure that you give them your full attention, unless you're calling the number. Not every time that somebody is feeling suicidal do they need to go to the hospital. That doesn't make any sense. In my current job, I don't hear it as often as I did on other places. In the prison, it was suicidal inmates 4 or 5 times a day. I have time to tell that story because that's one of my favorite stories. I was a brand new psychologist at the prison. And it was Good Friday, and I was the only psychologist there. Everybody else got the day off, but since I had the least seniority, I had to be there. And in the prison, they actually have a psych hospital in the prison, kind of like a Wellstone behind the bars. And except, even worse than Wellstone, if you can believe it. You're in this rubber suit behind glass, and it's all concrete and a toilet and nothing else. And this one inmate had gotten a shard of glass. And he was going to cut himself. And so when that happens, they call up the CERT team, that's the intervention team that has the big taser shields and everything. And they call up the psychologist. And the psychologist has 2 minutes to de-escalate the situation, or otherwise the CERT team is going to come in and he might have a broken bone or two, but he's not going to hurt it. He's not going to be suicidal. He's not going to kill himself. So I'd never done this before, and I had no training on how to do it either. And the guy, he was right there at the glass, right there with the glass at his vein, the shard of glass, and I'm like, man, I just don't know. I just don't think this is a good idea. And he said, why not? I'm thinking to myself, that's a good question. I mean, he's not leaving prison. Why is this not a good idea? So I just looked at him and I said, well, you gotta know when to hold. Know when to hold him. Know when to walk away. Know when to. And he just starts laughing. And he drops the glass. And they come in and they take the glass away and everything's fine. And the sergeant comes up to me afterwards and he's like, Dr. Justice, that's the damnedest thing I've ever seen in my life. Because it doesn't, you know.
How many times have you used it since?
No, I haven't. That's a one-timer. I have,
especially for
right, you know, of course, many people get joys out of seeing me sing. So, you know, it makes sense. All right. We want to show empathy. We want to make it clear that we're on their side. I am so sorry to hear that. That is probably the first thing that you say. I'm so sorry that you're having to deal with that. I'm so sorry that you're having those feelings. I couldn't imagine what it's like. Even for those of us who have been suicidal, each person's suicidal thinking is different. So we can't say that we know what it's like for any one person. So that is why we don't say, I know exactly what you're feeling. Precisely. Because who knows? Now, this is a tough one. You know, this requires a little balance. It is going to be helpful to get other people involved. And they're going to think that you're narking on them. So that's why you're not going to mention calling their father in the first 5 minutes. You got time. You got all the time in the world. But at some point, you're going to say, I have to tell you, as a father, I would want to know if my child was depressed. I would want to know that they were having these thoughts. How would you feel if we called your father on speakerphone right now? You've just suggested it. You haven't said you're doing it. You're just putting it out there. And what you're saying is logical. And there is going to be some hesitancy most times. And then you're going to say, I'm not going to do anything that makes you uncomfortable. We will not do anything that makes you uncomfortable. And you'll change the subject for a while. And then you'll go back to, who would you feel comfortable telling? One of the other things that is important to know is we may know some people and think, oh, their mother or their father is the perfect person in the world. But that might not be that person's perception of that individual.
Right.
You know, there are people in this world who think that my parents are perfect. And I will tell you, they didn't give me candy every Sunday. As a child, they give candy to all everybody else's children. So you might think, oh, their mother is great. Should they want to talk to their mother? Maybe not. And even if we get it to where they tell a friend, we're going in the right direction. Suicide survives in secrecy. The more people know what's going on, the less likely it is to happen. And you don't promise to keep it a secret. You don't say, I will never tell anybody, because I will tell you, I would be in a lot of trouble, because I have definitely called parents. I remember one time, and this was scary, I didn't like this at all. This person calls me and has a long history of depression, and he says, Josh, I just called you to let you know that I have a gun and I'm going to shoot myself right now. And then he hangs up the phone.
Oh.
I call the police. I call his parents. And he's like, and then afterwards he was like, I can't believe you called the police. But any day of the week and twice on Sunday. I don't care if you're mad at me. Because I'd rather have you be mad at me than attend your funeral. So we're not going to jump at the gun and call somebody. But I'm not going to promise that I won't call somebody if I get concerned enough. And if they storm out and you still feel like they're actively suicidal and they're in a car, I didn't promise anything.
What if they ask you to not tell?
So it is a great question. That's, they're always my favorite mark. I won't do anything that makes you uncomfortable, but I am committed to keep you safe.
I've told clients before that, starting now, I'm a mandated reporter.
Right.
If you tell me something and I think you're gonna hurt yourself or hurt someone else, I can't keep that portion of it a secret. I will do everything that I can to make sure that everything we talk about is confidential. But if I'm worried about your safety and something happening to you, then I'm going to share it with someone.
Definitely. And one of the advantages that you all have as lay people that I can't use while I'm a psychologist, I can only do this on the personal. You all can say, I love you. I love you. I don't want you to hurt yourself. I don't want you to die. And so I can't do anything that would facilitate you dying. And I can't tell my patients I love them. But you all can. That's one of the advantages. And they can't say that you don't. Because you do.
I think just going back to the empathy part, like I never use this word in my normal language, but I know when we've had death or whatever, people say they're sorry, I just cannot connect with that. Especially when I know maybe they haven't gone through something that I'm going through. The way I have been connecting with people with empathy is I'm like, that sucks. Like, there's nothing else to say. But I feel like every time I've had to say that to somebody, like they know I don't talk like that to begin with, to ever say that word. And then when I say it, I don't know if it's a shock or they're just like, you're right. Like they feel it to their core. When someone just says they're sorry, it's a knee-jerk reaction sometimes that we're just like, yeah, okay, thanks.
You make an excellent point, actually inspired, because in undergraduate at Utah State, I had a clinical psychology professor, Dr. Buck, who was also a member of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. He sang better than me. And I said to him one time, I was like, Dr. Buck, what if somebody's suicidal and they got a good reason? And he says, Smith, sometimes things just suck. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. It wouldn't be genuine to tell somebody going through a divorce, going through bankruptcy, that, tomorrow everything is going to be just fine. Because it might not be just fine tomorrow. Saying, this is horrible. I can imagine going through what you're going through right now. But I will be here every step of the way to help you through this, is something that we can say. So a couple of things that are big. One of the things that people ask is when to call 911. And that's a tough one. When you feel like you're losing control of the situation. And so they're leaving, they have a weapon out, you're calling 911. With the refer part, sometimes it's going to be a concern that they might need to go to a psychiatric hospital. You go with them. If you think the ER is bad, try waiting for a psychiatric hospital bed. 3 hours is efficient.
Right.
Yeah. And this is the one that's really tough, and I hate this one. Let's say you have somebody who is suicidal, but you don't feel like you can drive them in your vehicle. Then you have to call 911, and the ambulance has to take them to Clark or Floyd Hospital, whichever's closest. You have to be in the hospital ER for hours, get evaluated by the doctor there, and then the doctor sends the referral to Wellstone. And then you have to wait for Wellstone to accept you. Then you have to wait for an ambulance to drive you from the hospital to Wellstone. Then you have to do paperwork at Wellstone. Efficient under that circumstance is 12 hours.
It's awful.
It is, that is hell, you know. You know, just so you know, that's an incentive to be good. Because I thought dissertation was bad, but that 12 hours from the initial emergency to that they're safe at the hospital is a long time. Now, another thing that you all have as an advantage is you have me. You can text me. I'm on Facebook. I respond to the Facebook Messenger.
I can vouch for that.
That is true. I respond.
I've talked to you how many times today?
Right? I'm good at it. I can, while the kid is tantruming, I can be like, stop yelling. So, and I'm a psychologist. Yes.
Do you have like a keyword or something that you could text and say 988 or something?
That'd be fine.
You know,
And I will tell you, that's another great idea that I've used with families before. Once they know that the person is suicidal. So like my son Andrew struggles with suicidal thinking, and he's 14. His word is cantaloupe. And he hates cantaloupe. So when he goes up to us and says, Dad, I'd like cantaloupe, excuse us. Because if your parent is around other people, you don't want to say, Dad, I'm suicidal. Can you talk to me for a minute? But 988 in a texting format is just fine. And we have our emergencies numbers too. It is hard for me to imagine a circumstance where I'm talking to somebody who is pretty suicidal, and I'm going to feel comfortable with them going home and not telling anybody after we're all done. I'll tell you, we live in a very cruel world. This 12-year-old goes to Rock Creek. You think, not Parkview, not River Valley, it'll be fine. And people constantly cyberbullied her and verbally bullied her in person because she wore generic school uniforms and not name brand school uniforms. And called her white trash and just, everything. And she tried to choke herself with a seatbelt while her father was driving her to Zestos. It's, one of the other things, I was bullied in school pretty bad, like the messed up stuff. where they would pee in the toilet and then give me a swirling. Thrown in dumpsters and stuff like that. But I got to go home at the end of the day. I grew up in this building. This was like my sanctuary because nobody bullied me here. These with cyberbullying now, these kids don't get a break. I mean, it's 24 hours a day that they are being bullied. And that girl, you know, her father obviously saw what happened, but she wasn't going to go home until I knew that she was safe. And she had told her father everything. There is something that psychologists used to do a long time ago. I wish it was a longer time ago. But it did happen. It wasn't the most effective thing. It was called suicide contracts. And you would put it out there, sign this contract that you won't commit suicide, which is one of the stupidest things I've heard in my life, but I've also heard about lobotomies, so I can't say it is the stupidest. You cannot say, don't promise me that you won't commit suicide. That freaks them out.
Right, that's so much pressure.
It is a lot of pressure. For people who are feeling suicide, you're taking away one of their choices. So,
I would think you're making them feel very guilty about the thoughts that they're having, and so it's this cascade of feelings with more guilt and shame on top of already feeling bad. And now I'm going to let you down because I can't stop thinking about it.
right. Okay, so there's obviously a lot of things to talk about when it comes to this. Who has questions or comments? Yes.
Okay, so when you have someone that is extremely depressed, suicide all the time, you know, crying for hours on day, they've been in Wellstone, they're on medication, they're going to counselors, and just never be better. Like, how do you help them know that it can be better? Obviously, there's, I mean, I don't know what else to say, an imbalance. So something's not working.
All right. It is tough. And there are some people who are resistant to medication. Now, one of the things, and to tell you the truth, I believe this would have saved my brother Jared's life. There is this thing called gene site testing. And because back in the days, in the 90s, they would put you on a psychotropic medication and you would take it and it wouldn't help. And you go back 6 weeks later and you say it didn't help, like try it 6 more weeks. And then you come back and you're like, still not helping. And then maybe they give you something else. And goes on that, like my brother Jared never found the right medicine. And gene site testing takes a swab of your DNA from your cheek and they run it across all psychotropic medications just in case, you know, they don't have to do it again. And so they'll look at antidepressants and mood stabilizers and antipsychotics and anti-anxiety. And they'll break it down into green. This is a good one. Take this, there'll be limited side effects. Yellow, this will work, but there will be side effects. Red, do not take. Now, when I was really depressed, they put me on a medication called Abilify. Now that helps a lot of people. Does not help me because it gave me this horrible side effect where I was always tired and always restless.
No.
Oh, wow.
I hated it. So it was really bad for my job because I couldn't sit still for more than 10 minutes. So I had to make excuses to stand up. And I'd have to take a nap between every session. I was so tired. And I just told the psychiatrist, this isn't going to work. And it's weird. I had those suicidal thoughts for 17 years. And then when I got to the hospital, I was taking at that time lithium and Cymbalta. And all they did to my medicine is doubled it And then I had my first day without suicidal thinking.
Wow.
And I will tell you, it's a lot easier to concentrate without that in the back of your mind. Now, occasionally, people will ask me, Josh, what does it feel like to be cured? What are you doing? I have suicidal thoughts once or twice a month. The depression hasn't just gone away. I just know how to live with it. And when it's not every day, it's easier to deal with. I can rest up in between. As far as like supporting the person, you can also offer to go to their therapy session with them. As therapists, we only know what is presented to us.
Right.
And, some people don't put forth a well-rounded view of themselves. It's hard to be objective with yourself. In my mind, I can sing and dance like Ryan Gosling. Been told that this isn't true. But being able to talk to the therapist as a friend, and you're there, so confidentiality is fine, because say to your friend, how about I go to your therapist with you? And just say what I'm seeing. And also you learning that client's treatment plan. What is your coping skills? Because one of the things my wife will say to me when I tell her that I'm feeling suicidal, and my safe word is dingo. I don't know why. I'm a strange person. When I go up to her, I'm like, the dingo ate your baby.
That's funny.
And then she knows. But one of the things she will ask is, what coping strategy do you want to use? Which is a very good question with somebody who is working on their mental health. Because I have the ones that work for me. As hokey as it is, deep breathing really works. Shower, it's the only place a parent can go and feel alone.
That's not true.
Not even there.
No, I'm not safe there either.
My brother,
I had the closet.
sometimes my brother Jordan coming and picking me up and taking me to B-dubs. Now, some people that would sound like hell, but it's, knowing, so asking your friend, what coping strategy you want to use right now? How can I help you with that? Other questions? Sure.
So I'm going through this with my oldest son right now.
Yeah.
Military, 9 guys in his unit have committed suicide, and it's been a constant thing for, I guess the past 6 years. And so I'm here and he's in Utah, and he'll go, like you said, sometimes it's a little wave and sometimes it's a tsunami. And he called me 3 weeks ago and it was a tsunami. And of course, I'm just in the middle of my day. I'm doing my things. I'm busy. I pick up the phone and I can tell by the tone of his voice, of course, my heart drops and I just try to be completely present. I just in those moments when he's so far away and all I've got is him on the phone. This is what I keep trying to do, is just come up with because I ask him kind of some of those same questions. He's in therapy. They're doing virtual right now. He's on and off medications. And so I kind of go through, I'm like, did you take this, where are you at kind of in your cycle, all those kinds of things. But, and I try to just let him talk, but I'm just not sure, I pray my guts out while I'm on the phone. But when he says, same thing, I've got a gun in my mouth, and I'm trying as his mom to just keep it together so that I can figure out a logical way to push through this in the moment. And I'm just I guess I just keep trying to figure out maybe there's a checklist or something I can keep by my bed, or, you know what I mean? Like, something I can kind of go through and ask, and figure out.
So hard. And I wish I could give you the magic words. I'm so glad that he calls. Whatever's going on, he knows he can call his mom and she will take the call. Now, it's my understanding, I get confused sometimes, but is today your birthday?
No, it was like a week
Okay, well, still.
ago.
So here, this is the semicolon pin. And it's for survivors of suicide. And I love the symbol of the semicolon. And that's why I have a bunch of these, because a semicolon is used when a sentence could be over, but it keeps going. And so as us suicide survivors, our life could have been over, but we kept going. So since it was your birthday last week, I want you to have this.
Thank you, Dr.
You're welcome. One thing that I like to do with my long distance people, because I get some of those long distance calls sometimes. I like to switch it to FaceTime. We have the technology, and it's so great because one of the things that you can definitely tell about a person, about how their mood is doing, is their eyes. That's one of the first things that I look at whenever a patient comes in. Whenever I have one of my former Sunday school students come back from a trip, eyes. Especially before they marry a guy. I gotta look at that guy's eyes. Oh, great. I can read the eyes really well. Because when somebody is like, when they're at the stage where they're about ready to do it, those eyes are dead. You don't see any reflection in those eyes. And also how they're dressed, if they're shaved, if how their apartment looks. That all gives me information. Because when you're really bad, you're not doing your personal hygiene. And so this all gives me clues. And then they can see your smiling face. I'll tell you, the day that I attempted suicide, I had it all planned out. I had 17 years to think about this. And people who attempt suicide, they're not thinking logically. But I had planned out what I wanted to do that day. And as bizarre as it sounds, one of the things that I wanted to do was clean the church. The members clean the church here. And I was signed up to clean the church, and this church has meant a lot to me and helped me out when I didn't feel safe anywhere. And the problem, though, there was one problem I didn't think about. I was signed up to clean the church with my mom. And I almost gave myself away. Because I'm not a hugger. There's people who've known me for a long time that I've never hugged. And my mom on Mother's Day, if she gave me the chocolate milk. Other than that, probably. But that day, knowing that it was going to be the last time I saw my mom, I hugged her. And she knew something was odd. And your son being able to see your eyes will make a difference. Calling people that live close to your son, knowing the police, the police line for the county that he lives in, because one of the things that you can always do is a welfare check. And it's easier to call the regular police line for the county than 911. Yeah, 911, they're going to say it's not an emergency, but you call the local police line and you go into that I'm his mother tone. They'll send an officer to drop by every time. And I don't know what his situation is. If there are people, friends or others that could check on him, But also, it would be really good to know what his coping strategy is, what his behavior plan is, you know, what are the things that are helpful? You know, each person who's depressed has the things that are helpful for them to hear and the things that are not helpful for them to hear. So knowing what is helpful for your son, you know, when we take out teenagers out to a swimming activity and we review the safe swim rules, it's not because we're pro drowning. It's to avoid the drown. Talking to him on a day that he feels good.
Yeah.
What are the things that I could say that help you feel better? You know, one of the things that helps me feel better is stories from when I was a kid. My parents will tell those stories because me and my brothers, I mean, people who witnessed it, we did some pretty odd things. And those stories are really fun. But when I am feeling suicidal, and somebody says, Josh, you can't commit suicide, you have so much to do. That's not helpful, not helping. Not remember that.
I think what you said was key, when it's not bad.
When it's
That's
not
the
bad.
conversation. I mean, I go into labor with women to walk them through their birth, and I'm like, what don't you like?
Yeah.
What, you know, chomping gum, someone touching your ear, like, we gotta know what they hate.
And you don't have that conversation when they're at a 9.
Exactly. You have to way before, and it's like having that, okay, if I'm talking to you and it's something that you don't like, please let me know immediately.
Mhm.
Say, not helpful, raise your hand, you don't even have to say anything, just.
Yeah,
raise your
because
hand, not helpful.
you know, evidently, and how would I know? But my wife didn't like it when I had Dairy Queen chicken tenders and fries while she was in labor. What's she complaining about? She got all those ice chips.
Yeah.
Conversation.
We should have had a conversation before about not getting your brother to bring over some chicken tenders or fries. I was hungry. It was a long time and I'm just sitting there. And then he gave me the ice chips.
Great example.
The only time I yelled at my husband is when he took a drink of water next to me.
Yeah, she
I was
was,
allowed to have water,
yeah.
and that sent me over the edge.
And I will tell you, she was using non-Mormon words when I interrupted to talk to her bishop. Other questions?
Well, Angela, I'm really proud that your son will call you too, and I'm sure obviously whatever you're saying is working, because it's so why. And so if you can ask him when he's having a good day, when the wave is low, if you're gonna feel really empowered, then you'll have to lift. And then you just keep going through it over and over again.
One thing, Denise and I are committed to providing continual workshops on a variety of topics. We did some autism workshops in April for Autism Awareness Month, and in 2022, we want to provide workshops to people in the community for a lot of different things, not just mental health, because you know there's other stuff out there that ain't great. And so this is Denise's business card. If we could pass it around so we can make sure that you all are aware of anything that's going on, or if you have any questions for us. But I really appreciate you all being here on a Thursday night. And if you have any questions going forward, after this, message me, or you know, if you see me around, I'm always willing to talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job.
Please make sure to have some cookies. Would it be okay and appropriate, we did not open with a prayer, and I apologize for that. I'm used to running just regular meetings, not church kind of meetings, but it's okay if I leave us with a word of prayer. Sure. Our dear Heavenly Father, we're indeed grateful to be able to have this space. We're grateful for Josh's willingness and strength to be able to share his personal family stories and experiences and help us to be enlightened and uplifted and empowered with ways to help serve and love others, especially those that are struggling with depression and suicidal thoughts. We pray, Lord, that those that are dealing with those struggles right now, Lord, we just pray that you will help them to pick up the phone and ask for help, that they will feel angels surround them, hold them up and lift them up until they learn to walk again and breathe again on their own. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen.
We get the link for this,
The recording?
Yeah.
Oh,